it was like a pounding drum in the jungle, far away, but getting closer, saying, say the words to him, say it, say it, say it. For Christ's sake, say it. And I suddenly said it. It's not real. For the first time in my life, it's not real. And immediately, I almost started laughing, like, holy cow, like, that makes more sense of my 40-ish years on this earth than anything else.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. It's a place where ignorance isn't punished, curiosity is rewarded, and conflict doesn't have to mean contempt. As always, I hope that I've brought someone that neither you nor I fully agree with. And we've brought ourselves, so we already have someone like that here. Today I'm joined by Tim Mills, better known as the Harmonic Atheist. He's a former pastor in training and missionary who memorized several books of the Bible, as well as manually making a copy for himself. Now he has very much dedicated himself to helping people recover from abuse from the church. He might say abuse from religion. We'll talk about what it really means to be a Christian, and then how and why he wants to get rid of the whole thing. This actually all connects to my upcoming video on debunking the false connections between myths and Christianity. So make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when that drops. And now I give you the Harmonic Atheist, Tim Mills. As I learn more about you, I really appreciate your heart. You're such a caring, compassionate, and passionate. I think maybe the passion comes through more than the compassion sometimes, but in all of your ardent anti-Christian stance, it's very much a loving endeavor for you, it seems.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, it's very, very true. And I'm very passionate, but I also care very much about people, and I hope that those things shine through. And I hope too that we can continue to have civil conversations with people, even if we have very ardent disagreements, but try to keep it civil, because so much of our conversations often drift towards animosity, and there's we're all going through tough journeys, we're all thinking through stuff, and it's no reason we can't try to just bounce ideas off each other and then let each other sit with it and come back another day and still be friends either way.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about what your approach is, what your style is, and what your goal is and how you're trying to get there?
My goal with the channel?
Sure. And just your goal with the interaction with theology. I mean, it seems like this is not just a YouTube thing, that you're really the same guy in real life that you are on the channel. So are you out there anti-witnessing outside of YouTube, or like how do you deal with Christians?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I definitely am the same person as you see on camera. I think that's important for us to have that integrity. But yeah, it's easy because your passions come through on camera from what you would otherwise talk about in real life. I don't have the opportunity to talk to Christians too much about this in real life, and that's not by choice. It just doesn't work out that way. I would be glad to, but I would say by and large my passion is more to talk to people who've already escaped. It's kind of one of those things where if you can't see it, you can't see it. And those who have ears to hear, let them hear. I don't want to waste my time telling someone, do you not see the absurdity, if they just can't see it, knowing that very likely there will be a time in 5 or 10 or 15 years when they very well may see the absurdity, or at least investigate it enough to make it worthwhile to talk about. If someone is going to cling to ancient mythology and not admit that there are discrepancies and issues and syncretism and copying and earlier cults that Christianity borrowed from and that Judaism borrowed from, if they can't see that, it's almost a mixture of they can't see it and they won't see it, and therefore to me they're not ready to be unplugged from the matrix yet. I want to spend my energy and my time on people that are saying, I've done the hard work here. I know this isn't right. And I know this is toxic. I know it's hurting our world. I know it's mythology. I know it's sick and psychopathic. And I'm done. I'm done trying to make this fit. And at this point, I just want to heal and reclaim my life. But I know that the journey to getting past all this is to weed through, like, what are these roots that have gone so deep in our hearts? Because you can admit it's mythology, and yet sometimes 5, 10, 15 years later, you see people saying, I'm still responding to this or that topic as a Christian. And it's like this stuff, especially if you got into it as a child, as I know you did, the indoctrination started early, the healing from this is a very long process, and it takes a lot of honesty and a lot of digging. And honestly too, it takes other people that like you might say something that it might relate to me in my journey, but for some reason I didn't think of it. But the minute it comes out of your mouth, I'm like, oh yeah, wow, why didn't I think of that? But you say it, and it relates to me, and it helps me to get the words to think through it for myself and to heal. And my main goal is to help people heal, but also I would say there are some projects that have been going on behind the scenes. And I would say if someone were to keep following my channel for the next year, it's probably going to look like the same as it's always looked. Hopefully within a year to 2 years from now, and for sure 3 to 5 years from now, it's going to start to look like a little bit of more of a balance. And there's going to be more monologues, but more specifically, more documentary monologues where we talk through this. And when it's done, like you get to watch a video showing where Christianity came from, how it evolved, but also you get to have a link to a Google document so you can show it to other people if they want to dive deeper with, links and references. So anybody can follow, but say, yeah, no, I see what you mean. That is, we are copying from Greco-Roman mystery cults and mythologies to create Christianity. And yeah, these presentations definitely nail that shut. We need to basically shut the apologists down. So that's kind of my long-term goal. In the meantime, I hope to just be a sounding board for people where people say, like, my story matters. Because a lot of people, I think they're just thinking of themselves as like, oh, I'm just this one-off person, and my family doesn't like the fact that I left Christianity, and nobody really likes me, and I'm in the Bible Belt. You hear that all the time. I'm in the Bible Belt, and 95% of my town is Christian, and they feel like they can't do anything. And to come on a channel like mine or yours now, and to say, you know what, I can share my story, and who knows, but maybe my story becomes someone else's survival manual. That's a powerful place to be,
Absolutely. I think if you go into the comment section, and there's always people in there that like, thank you so much, you validated my experience, this is exactly my story, and then you have an entirely other story that's got an entirely different bent to it, and you have people in there that are like, yes, this was my story, thanks for sharing this. I feel like your channel is another place where your heart really shines through, because you pretty much have anybody come on, like anyone who's got a story and is willing to share it with the world. You provide that platform. I would guess that you have launched more successful atheist YouTube channels than anybody else. When I go back through your history, like person after person, like long before they were something, now they're this huge, they're on Atheist Experience, or they've got their own YouTube channel or whatever. It's like back in the day, he was on Tim's channel.
It's been an honor. I mean, it's just such an honor. And I like, too, the idea of trying to give people a platform where they can really speak slowly about it. Because I feel like there's some channels that, and every channel's got their nuance, so I'm not saying this is bad, but some of them like to keep it moving. Let's just, or they want to ask all the questions and drive every single point. And to just say to somebody like, hey, the floor is yours. Please tell us, where how your journey's been. And, as sort of the moderators of it all, we're responsible to help people become better storytellers. But at the same time, I think a lot of people can tell their stories. They're just not used to a sort of an open door to say, just tell us what's on your heart, and then take us down some of these different individual stories. And it's amazing. I remember, I'll never forget it. One lady I interviewed a while ago, before we started, she said, I don't know if I could fill like an hour and a half. There's just not that much to talk about. My story isn't that exciting. And we recorded for about 2.5 hours.
I was going to say.
And when it was done and we went off air, she said, you know what? We have just scratched the surface. And it's amazing, but your mind remembers stuff, and you get real chatty when you're safe. You get real chatty.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. I want to ask for your Christian credentials, because, of course, we've got all the accusations that you were never really Christian. That seems to be the first one that pops up. If I recall correctly, you said that you copied the Bible by hand at one point and had at least hundreds of verses memorized. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. And yeah, I'll answer that question, then I'll fill in the sort of a little bit more of the behind the scenes. But yeah, at one point I was so concerned about the idea of not skipping over any verses, and because you can read quickly and kind of just read devotionally, you might say, where you're just like looking for, you're not like looking for every single word, you're just looking for what pops to you today, of that whole touchy-feely, like, what is God trying to say to me today to make me feel better about myself? And it's real easy to do that as a Christian, but I became convinced that we need to be careful to listen to and honor every single word that God has written down. And so it wasn't by hand, it was I was typing it. I was fortunate to have a really good typing teacher in high school that taught me how to type really well. So at one point I was typing like 100 words a minute. So, but I literally was like, had the Bible on the side and then I'm just typing it in. It was also in the early stages of like all this Bible software. So I was like, I'm going to have my own like Bible software notes. Like I can type in all my notes, but it became less relevant as time went on because other softwares were able to give you like 10 different translations or 30 translations plus notes. But it was a at the time it was a helpful thing for me, and yeah, I was a Bible quizzer, memorized thousands of verses, entire books of the Bible. My dad, for years when I was growing up, would make us memorize verses, and we'd have to like Saturday mornings before we went out and played, we'd have to go through a couple hundred of them with him, and it was a big deal. But I grew up in a Christian home. Mom and dad had gone to Dallas Theological Seminary, and my dad was a Christian school teacher. My mom was a nurse, but focused on us kids when we were younger. And everything was about Jesus. Christian radio was on all the time. I mean, all the time in the background. Like we didn't have music unless it was hymns, but there was a local AM Christian station. It was just on, even like just a little bit. And when everyone was like quiet, they'd crank it up and we'd hear the preacher. And then when everyone's doing stuff, they just crank it down, but you'd still kind of hear it for years. And when I was homeschooled, I continued that where I listened intentionally to pastors like Chuck Swindoll and John MacArthur and Alistair Begg and R.C. Sproul and other people, the big names that some of us know. And that became a big deal, reading all their books. And between my verses at home and Bible quizzing at school, it became thousands of verses. And my passion was to spread the word, spread the gospel. When I was 8 years old, I remember reading about Hudson Taylor, who was a British man who had done everything to fit into the Chinese culture at that time, which included shaving your head except for a little band of hair in the back. And he was just willing to basically give up his life so he could get a chance to get in there and say, you need to know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. That was my driving passion. I eventually sort of morphed into a desire to be a pastor. Sort of John MacArthur was my main sort of hero, you might say, and my example. And I really did want to follow in his footsteps in some ways. But some things shifted for me in Bible college. I became convinced that young men shouldn't be pastors because the pastoral epistles specifically say this should be an older man who has already raised children. So I'm like, God, what do you want me to do now? You've given me this passion to be a pastor for 20 years. Now here I am at Bible college at the very end of it saying, what do I do next? And I don't think young men should be pastors. So what is this all about? And sure enough, like just, you expect God to show up in those moments. And sure enough, he did. There was a student in the class who her dad and mom had been missionaries to Papua New Guinea. And they had done work with New Tribes Mission, which is now called Ethnos 360. And it was sort of like Wycliffe, if you know Wycliffe Bible translators, but they do it differently where they specifically don't go in and just start talking about Jesus. They take a couple of years to learn the language and the culture, and then they slowly translate the Bible and they start teaching starting from Genesis 1. So that you learn about the importance that there's only one God and the importance of blood sacrifice and all that. So when you get to Jesus and you see him as the spotless lamb, you get it. You've connected the dots because you have a context. And if you're familiar with animism, that is crucial. The Jesus story would not make sense to tell an animist tribal person because they're seeing spirits everywhere. So Jesus is just like another one of a billion spirits that they deal with. They need to know that there's only one God and all these other spirits are pretend. And so by the time you get to Jesus, they're like, oh, what? He's our hero. He's our hero figure. He's our savior. And they did it. This couple did it. And this movie that they made about him is called Itao, which means it's true. And this whole tribe started shouting when they heard about Jesus' death and resurrection. Itao, it's true. It's true. It changed my life. And I became convinced that God was saying, yes, I do want you to be a pastor, but I want you to be a missionary first. And so I went with New Tribes for a while. Did live in New Guinea for a while with some tribal people, grass huts. Had some interesting experiences. Like I got bit in the elbow by a rat the size of a cat. Some crazy stuff happened. But long story short, I felt like that was what God wanted. Like, be a missionary first. Go translate the Bible in the jungle. And my greatest desire was to know God and to let other people know what God had done for them. So I was definitely, to answer the question of like, were you really a Christian? It was my everything. From my personal private devotion and my love for the Lord, everything was about Jesus. There was nothing that wasn't under his lordship and his authority. And it wasn't even an issue of like, this is what you should do. This is the privilege. It's an honor to serve your master, to be able to bring other people into the kingdom, into the beauty of the knowledge that you can be saved and rescued from your sins.
So as we're recording this right now, John MacArthur, who sounds like who's pretty influential to you, has died recently. Did you have any particular reactions to that, or any surprising feelings about that? How did your view of him change?
It definitely changed. Yeah, his death didn't mean much to me, but I remember when I was like a teenager and I'd listened to him for years. I remember he came. I was in Pennsylvania and he was in California, but he came to a local church about an hour away, and my parents, knowing that this was a big deal to me, that I really honored John MacArthur, and they did too, but they knew that I really liked to listen to him. They said, "Why don't we go to this church and hear him speak?" And at the very end, they said, like, "Do you want to go up and talk to him? He's signing books. Why don't you go shake his hand and say hi?" And I honored him so much at that time. I said, I honestly, I don't want to. I feel like I can't do it. Like, I don't want to. And I literally stood like 30 feet away and just watched him. He was larger than life to me. And that certainly changed when I deconverted, because now I saw him as the perpetrator of a mythology-based worldview and very toxic worldview, and certainly a lot of other things in terms of patriarchy and misogyny, and just not dealing with abuse the right way. A lot of stories came up from his church that were disturbing, but by the time I heard about them, I wasn't surprised. I just know that that's what evangelical pastors do. They try to sweep things under the carpet and protect men, even when they should be exposed. And by the time when he died a few weeks ago, it just was like, he didn't mean anything to me. But I guess in a sense of we should sort of have moments of reflection when big things that did affect our lives before change. And it's interesting. It's been an interesting year for me. Both I've had two grandparents also pass away in the last 2 months. So it's been a lot of the death thing has been an interesting recurring theme for me recently. But I feel like more than anything, I just want to tell the world John MacArthur was a liar. He was just a flat out liar. And he told a lot of people a lot of deceptive things. And he may have been better than other people in the sense that most likely, from all that I know, he wasn't, doing anything shady with money or with women or whatever. As far as I know, he was practicing what he preached, which is a good thing to see in this world, because a lot of men don't do that. But he still hurt a lot of people because he's entrenching them in lies. And so I just look at it and say, I'm just sad. I'm sad for all the people that got influenced by him. I'm sad for him that he lived his life and never really lived a day of it. He lived thinking, I'm now, in the hospital with pneumonia, and if this is it, then, I may go unconscious, but when I'm conscious next, I'll be in front of my Lord and Savior. And I'm like, that's sad. That's really sad. You did not live a day of your life, and his entire life has been wasted, and he's putting that poison on millions of other people. Breaks my heart. But
let me contextualize the word liar. The missionary pastor-bound Tim Mills, would today Tim say that Tim was a liar?
That's a good question. I would say effectively yes, intentionally no. I think that the difference would be there's a certain point at which you start to become aware of other information. So, for example, when you're younger, you don't get told a lot of information, but it's sort of a cliche that when you go to seminary, your faith doesn't die because you're learning more. Your faith dies for a lot of people in seminary because you're learning things like, where did the Bible come from? And, Jesus quoting the Septuagint and different issues and all these different variations, and the different books that probably fed into the fact that there's 2 or 3 different passages that are being woven together for the Genesis stories. And you think to yourself, okay, I didn't know any of that stuff. And while I didn't know any of it, and I was ignorant of all of it, and I really was. I mean, you got to credit them in the sense of deception. Like, it takes a lot to put someone through Christian high school, homeschooling, Bible quizzing, years of being under the pastor, years of listening to pastors on the radio, years of reading systematic theologies, going to Bob Jones University, going to Lancaster Bible College, going to New Tribes Mission, and no one ever once that I'm aware of said anything about where this thing came from. Now, I think it's on me to say, well, why didn't you ask better questions? But at that point, because you are convinced it's real, you don't think those questions are relevant. But I mean, you got to credit them. They're pretty good at deceiving people, if passively or actively. Was I lying? Sure, in a sense that I was telling people about Jesus. I did a lot of street preaching in Pennsylvania, around Philadelphia and some other poor communities there at Chester. I did a lot of street preaching, a lot of soup kitchen preaching on South Street, Philadelphia, crazy place. Just all kinds of stuff. And now that I look back at it, yeah, and it's a similar parallel to when I was a Christian, I would have spanked my children. And you say, well, when you deconverted, did that change? Oh, hell yeah, it changed instantaneously. Like that, this is wrong. But what was that abuse? Yeah. Did you mean it as abuse? No, I thought I was raising them in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And this is what you do to get children to honor God. You give them spankings. Was it abuse? Yes. But it's a question of, once you know better, do you do better? And so, yeah, effectively it was a lie. I didn't mean to lie to anybody, and I have apologized to some people about it. I've gone back to some people. It's interesting, some of the youth group that I preached to, I did a lot of youth group work. Some of the youth group people escaped before I did, where I reached out to this one guy in particular. He's 5-7 years younger than me. And to me, when I was like a youth group leader, he was like a little kid. But now, we're both adults. Years have passed. I reached out to him. He's an adult now as well. And he's like, thanks for reaching out. It's great to hear from you 15 years later. Apology accepted, but you don't need to, it wasn't necessary. But just FYI, I saw through this a long time ago. I didn't even get through college before I realized this doesn't make any sense. And it's stuff like that, but I also know that there's some people to whom I could apologize for my role in it. And I do feel very culpable, and I do feel like that's an important piece of this, is to make reparations when you can. That some people wouldn't want that. They would say, you're self-deceived and your apology means nothing because you're basically, now you're lying. Now as an atheist, you're lying. You were telling me the truth and you're a Christian. So I balance who I say that to more tightly now, based on some experiences. And so I feel bad. I feel apologetic, and I'm glad I escaped. I mean, I think too, just looking at it from my perspective as in a sense a victim of it, which we all were, I felt like when I finally escaped, I won the lottery, because I could have imagined myself easily going to my deathbed thinking this was all real. And I was like, at least I've got some time left to live my real life.
How old were you when you deconverted?
Let's see. This was 6 years ago, so I was 42. I'm now 48.
Like, is that embarrassing for you that it took you 42 years deeply entrenched in this thing?
That's a really good question. I've heard people say both things, where they've said, what took you so long? Other people can relate and say, like, yeah, I get it. Like, this stuff goes deep. I think that the thing for me, I'm embarrassed in one sense, but the clincher for me was that I was not on the fence. And I know maybe that's not a good thing. I should have been more on the fence. But, I took verses like the verse in Revelation about if you're lukewarm, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. I took that very seriously. And I don't mean to say that I just made it real in my mind as a form of getting out of any judgment from God, but I really did believe it. I really believed it. I mean, I talked to God. It was my everything. I wasn't just talking to him. I was actively trying to change my worldview to be more aligned with his thoughts. I mean, I thought to myself that basically what we're aiming at when we die as Christians is we're aiming at a spot where he glorifies us, but also we get to think correct thoughts for the first time in our lives. We're never going to sin, and part of sin is idolatry, and idolatry in part is just making up false things about God, saying God is a certain way. Like, no, he's not. That's a lie. That's idolatry. You've made up a God that's comfortable to you, but that's not the real God. You've lied to yourself for your comfort zone. And so getting away from idolatry and getting into a sinless state in heaven means you're going to think the right thoughts. God's going to give them to you, plant them in your heart in some way. You're going to see his face and you'll be like him. You'll be glorified, but you'll also be right. You'll think right thoughts. So really, why not go on that journey now? Think the right thoughts right now. And so, for example, I was working on a prayer book as well as a worldview book, 2 different books that were both like 1,000 pages long. And I did intend to eventually publish them if I, continued. I'm glad I didn't. But it was basically the idea, like it's the prayer book was about the idea of we read stuff all the time in devotionals or C.S. Lewis or hear something in a sermon that we really like that's a good idea. I should go back and we put a little note down. Thought, well, why don't you start praying that? So, C.S. Lewis says, God is like this and God is doing that. Why not turn it into a second person prayer and say, God, you are doing this? So I went back to all these years of notes and books and theologies and devotionals, and I was turning all of it that I could that was meaningful to me into a prayer book and categorizing it. And then also with evolution, saying, God, evolution is such bullshit. And if it's correct to say evolution is not what happened and God intentionally designed it, then why would we say that evolution as a whole did not happen, but still there's like random stuff? The question, is God random? And the more I thought about it for years, I thought, no, there's no way that God is random. When he designed the way a tree grows, or the way the clouds do this, and the way the spirals of the universe grow, the way anything happens, it's in some way going to reflect his personality, his nature, the glories of heaven, the glories of the gospel, something about him. He is telling us something. And so I was working on a book that tried to look at everything we could in life, everything, and say, what is God specifically weaving into our reality, where he's kind of putting his signature there? I put my signature on this and that and that. You missed it, but my signature is still there. If you have eyes to see, you will see it. And so I liken it to that movie, The Matrix, where Neo gets shot, and then when he wakes up, he doesn't see the Matrix anymore. He sees the green code. And I sort of, in that genre of saying, I basically saw the green code everywhere. Everything to me was the signature of God. Everything, every tree, every cloud, every sunset, every person, it was all real to me. And in addition, I really made the idea of heaven and hell very real to myself. I remember that movie from Stephen King where the girl can just make people go on fire, or fire starter. And I remember thinking to myself, that's kind of a sick, twisted movie. But as soon as I thought about it, I thought, you know what? That's basically where everyone that doesn't know Christ is headed, to being on fire forever. And so as a means to be more serious about the gospel, and also as a means to not be tempted by the flesh of like, oh, that woman's really beautiful. It's like her curves or whatever. I began to think of everybody as being on fire around me. Like everyone around me is on fire. Don't see that woman. Oh, she's so sexy, whatever. She's on fire. And C.S. Lewis, in his book, I think it's The Great Divorce, but he talks about the idea somewhere about if you could really see people for who they really are, in the sense of who they're going to be, this sinner that's saved by grace is someday going to be so glorious that they'll be like an angel, that if you could see their true ultimate form, you'd be tempted to bow down and worship them like an angel right now. But conversely, the people that are sinful and pride and won't bow their knee to Christ, that eventually, if you could see the grotesqueness of them in hell burning, but like monsters, just consumed with their selfishness, you wouldn't be tempted to say, oh, they're so sexy, they're so beautiful. Like, you'd be like, you are absolutely freaking hideous. You're a monster. And to see that ultimate reality. And so I did that. I saw people that way. I saw people as on fire and as either glorious in their ultimate reality of where they're going to be in heaven, or hideous in hell. And God's signature, his mark was everywhere. And so when you live that way for years, and you take what's indoctrinated into you and you take it to a much higher level, like this stuff, I was indoctrinated into it, but there's something about my personality that grabbed it and loved it and took it to whole new levels. I was intense. And I felt there was an arrogance too that develops, because you're like, why doesn't everyone else see eternity as this big deal? Like, or like warning people, Isaiah 6, who will go for us? And Isaiah says, here am I, Lord, send me. Like, I look around me, I'm like, you all just want your white picket fence Christianity. Who else is going to take it seriously? I'm like, I think this is stupid. Take God seriously. Take hell seriously. Take the gospel seriously. He died for you. This is like life and death stuff. And the kingdom of God matters. And it shocked me that everyone around me seemed to be playing with Christianity. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. My life either counts or it doesn't. And of course, for me, I'm going to make it count. And so for someone in that intensity, who sees it all as fully real, looking back, I'm not surprised it took me so long to get out, because there's just, it took so much for me to see. And I describe it as like your worldview is dominoes that are lined up. And so when I started, it took me 3 years to really think through it. But I was like taking micro steps towards the dominoes, and every little kick, it couldn't do much damage because I still had a mile to go to get to the dominoes. But you take those millimeter steps, and eventually you've traversed your mile, and then you eventually take a couple last steps. It's like, bam, it just all falls down. But it was 3 years of very intense and interesting research. But so glad I did it.
Yeah, and you say it all falls down. In my experience, and I haven't talked to as many, whatever you want to call them, deconstructionists or deconversionists, whatever. In my experience, it's not as much like it all suddenly falls down as much as you look back and realize it already fell down, and now you have to acknowledge it. And that's the moment it feels like everything fell down, when really it was just 1,000 little steps that you now are left with nothing. And I feel like that's the weight, the surprise and the terror of it is, oh, I don't have this thing that I thought that I had all along. And it's not just a matter of losing your best imaginary friend. It's a matter of having lost everything that you dedicated your life to, all those years in as a missionary, all those years studying the Bible, all that time where I was typing out the Bible, all that, or like, who was I married, how many kids that I had, what I chose as a profession, like everything that you are was wrapped up in this thing. If you really believed it, like if you took God at his word, if you really tried to follow it, then you're left with nothing at the end. Tell me about some of those dominoes. When did you first realize there were dominoes that were going down? And was there anything before that?
There were. I think it's. I wish I had journaled at that time, because there was so many little things that did happen. I think it was a whole series of events. I would say the one of the ones that made a big deal to me and to some other people around me was, I remember saying to some loved ones something like this. I said, just so you know, I'm doing a lot of digging, a lot of research. Some things just are weird. I'm coming up with some really weird things that I don't know how to quite interpret. And I said, I just want to put this out there. I want to go where the truth leads more than my current worldview. And I think that right now my current worldview is the truth. But if it's not, I want the truth more. And it was funny. Christians were horrified at my having said that. Like, how can you pursue the truth and it leads you away from your current worldview when your worldview is very biblically aligned? And they just couldn't get it. But it's funny that my deconstruction was focused primarily on comparative mythology, but there's like this second underlying stream of like, when you see Christians' responses to deconstruction, it actually speeds it up. And I think they don't realize the damage that they do. They shoot themselves in the foot, because they're like, we're just saying you're stupid. The fool said in his heart there was no God. And the Bible's this solid rock, and people have tried for centuries to break the rock. And every time their hammer gets broken, but the rock still stands. It's a firm foundation. And try all you want, but the Bible's going to be proven true, and you'll be proved a liar. And they kind of see that like that as if that's the answer, like they've given it. The Bible can do no wrong, and God is God. But it shocked me that Christians had no imagination. And it's funny, I've used this illustration before, but there's a show that I watched just endless times, probably dozens of times growing up, called Anne of Green Gables. The main character, Anne, she talks about the concept of having a scope for the imagination.
Would you prefer to sit in the ladies' waiting room?
No, I prefer to sit here. There's so much more scope for the imagination. Thank you just the same.
And she was basically looking at people who were boring in the way that they lived their lives and the way that they talked. And so they would just, they would pass by a lake and they would say, oh, that's just whatever the name's lake, the name really is. And she would say, oh, no, that's not its name. Its real name is the Lake of Shining Waters.
Pretty doesn't seem the right word to use, nor beautiful either. Don't go far enough. It is wonderful, wonderful.
That's Barry's Pond.
Oh, no. This is the Lake of Shining Waters. That's its rightful name.
And it was very flamboyant, very colorful. But you got the sense very clearly that she lives in a world where she can imagine stuff. And hers was more, imaginary friends kind of stuff. But it was a big launching point for me to think about the fact that Christians have no scope for the imagination for how else their religion might have evolved. And as I realized that over and over, like, Christians don't seem to be asking the right questions, and they don't seem to care. Why are they so callous? Why does this not make a big deal? And so, for example, I remember at one point saying to somebody, like, look, do you realize, and I'm just pulling this out of the air, I don't remember exactly where this is from, but I think it was from the Odyssey, the Iliad of the Odyssey, but it might have been from a different book. But one of the ancient books had, like, the main character going to this city, then that city, this city, that city, this city, that city, this city, back and forth. And then when you look at Paul's journeys, it's literally like the same list. And I remember telling somebody, like, that's really, really weird and ironic. And I remember a lot of other things like that, where I'd talk with people about, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Dionysius, and then Christians came up with the silliest stuff, like, well, God was just sort of planting the ideas in their heads for the truth he was later going to reveal. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. It sounds more like later people copied the earlier stories and just changed them. But the fact that they were coming up with no answers or poor answers and not caring was sort of like a second track for me, and it probably did speed it up. But I probably did a lot of my grieving during those 3 years of research. For me, it literally was a very last minute thing where it came together. And that's a weird feeling. I liken it again in The Matrix, where they're teaching Neo jujitsu and they just plug it in and hit the upload button. And like 20 seconds later, he's like, I know Kung Fu. And it was like that for me, where suddenly everything came together. I was just sitting there at my desk and on a Saturday morning, the end of September 2019, and I'd been thinking about all these things for so long, but the cadence was increasing. I was thinking about more and more things, researching more things. Fascinated, honestly. It was like, it wasn't getting boring. It was getting really weird, and like, why is that in the Bible? That doesn't make sense. And I had so many questions, really good questions, and a lot of crazy cool answers that were coming up that weren't leading me towards Christianity, but I still was not out. And I kept on asking God, like, God, please help me figure out what I'm missing here, how to put this together. I was sort of trying to become a better apologist, but also just trying to stay close to God. Like, God, this feels weird, and I miss that intimacy with you, where it's a very simple faith. It's very simple. The Bible's the word from God, and the gospel's where it's at. The gospel changes lives. And suddenly none of that made sense anymore. And I watched a video or something, some things clicked in my mind. I said, you know what? I don't think this is real. It was the first time I'd ever really voiced it, and it was all in my head. But I said, I don't think this is real. And I began this little miniature dialogue for a few minutes in my head, like, no, there's no way this is not real. There's just this. And my immediate first big response, I'm not saying this is logical or rational, just what my mind came up with. You'd have to be implying that for 2,000 years, and really more for Judaism, but for thousands of years, all these people en masse have been deceived. That many people have been deceived? It's like, no way. There's too many people that have analyzed and hyperanalyzed and researched. There's no way. And I immediately thought, well, you think the Muslims have all been deceived? The Buddhists and Hindus, they've been around longer than Christianity. They're all deceived. Why are they all deceived, but we couldn't be? And once you, again, scope for the imagination, yes, whether you conclude Christianity is true or not, just to say it could be technically incorrect. As a Christian, you think, no, I don't think it is. But technically it could be, because we're going to do that to everyone else in the room. You could be wrong. Your belief could be wrong. Your worldview could be wrong. Technically, so could mine, just theoretically. But once you open that door and say, if it were theoretically wrong, what would that look like? And I mean, again, I'm talking about thoughts that just flooded in seconds. And it was like a pounding drum in the jungle, far away, but getting closer, saying, say the words to him, say it, say it, say it. For Christ's sake, say it. And I suddenly said it. It's not real. For the first time in my life, it's not real. And immediately, I almost started laughing, like, holy cow, like, that makes more sense of my 40-ish years on this earth than anything else. It would make more sense of my experience to say that this is just another religion, another cult, another mythology than anything else that I've tried to do. And I just sat there thinking, I I can't believe that it's taken me 40 whatever years to get out of it, but there's no way that this is not mythology. And all these things I've been studying for 3 years that were just begging for an answer, the answer the whole time was very obvious. This is mythology. As soon as I said the words, the whole house of cards crumbled. And I was like, I was out. I mean, within that hour, I was fully deconverted. And I felt like I was the sucker in the room all my time in Christianity, but I also felt so relieved that I had gotten out. Again, I could have easily seen if the cards had fallen differently. I could have gone to my deathbed thinking this was real. So I was so glad I escaped. And at that point, obviously, life changed radically from that moment on.
Yeah.
So,
did you have any, aside from the theological and philosophical weight of realizing the error of what you had believed, was there any like more practical, like, oh no, what do I do with my life now? Like how do I, like, I've got all of my friends, all my community, all my everything is all Christian. I can't say what I know to be true in my head. Or was it like relief of like, finally now I can be free? Or like what was emotionally and practically that like for you?
yeah, it's probably a little different for me at that point in my life. I think I had seen a lot of Christians that just didn't impress me much. And so I was plugged into a community, but I was also like not that impressed with people. I felt like people were pretending. I'd see worship services and think, this feels like we're all going through motions. This feels like smoke and mirrors.
Did you know that you felt that way, or was it only in retrospect? Like, would you go to church each week and be like, these guys, like, hopefully some of them will get saved and be real Christians? Like, was it an active thought?
No, I would say that one was probably, I think, more passive. It was probably more back of the mind. It was just that angst, like the splinter in your mind that says something's not right. This feels too fake. This feels too superficial. Something feels wrong about this. And maybe it is just the brand of Christianity, their denomination, but something's off here. But I just felt heavy in my heart for years. And I felt like at times it was me, like I had bad information or I had a lack of faith. At times, of course, as a Christian, you can't help but ask yourself, maybe it's sin in me that's leading me, or pride. I'm sure I went through all those hoops. But the biggest thing for me at that point was not the loss of community. It certainly was how it would affect my family. That was a huge deal. But at the same time, I think, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a fundamentalist, and it probably is going to come across that way a little bit, but I immediately felt the need to spread the good news, if I can put it that way, to tell people this isn't real. And I don't mean immediately as in like that hour, but probably within the first week, it hit me like, if you know something that other people don't know, you got to speak up. If people are being suckered into this thing under false pretenses and heck, you went to Bible college, several of them. You went to mission school. You read hundreds of Bible expositing books. You did more work on this than most Christians you know of, apart from like pastors and teachers and seminary professors, but you did more work than most lay people did. And arguably for, average Joe in the pew, hundreds of times more things than them, and you got suckered. What chance did they have? If it's just like, the preacher is telling you the truth and you better bow your knee or you're going to have hell to pay. I felt this need to say there's so much that I could do. And also, as I contemplated it, I did sort of have an example, as it were, in Derek Lambert. I know you know Derek with Myth Vision. Anyone that doesn't know Myth Vision.
That's another name that, like, you interviewed him before he was a thing, and now he's a thing.
He was actually, he was doing great with his channel before I interviewed him. His channel was much smaller then, but he's certainly grown it, and kudos to him for that. He's done a great job of growing his channel. And he was really instrumental in sort of getting some people to look at my channel. So I appreciate him. But yeah, he's grown tremendously. But his focus, for anyone that doesn't know him, is, and there's other people like him doing it now, but his focus is just saying there's mythology woven into this stuff. There's mythological origins that we can start to do a better job of understanding. And so he brings on professors and authors who talk about that stuff. But I thought for a while I wanted to be sort of copying him. Number one, he did such a great job. He still does a great job that it's hard to follow that kind of act. But I also thought, there's something else to this that you can bring that's different. Because I think people like Derek they're the main thing that they bring is information. And that was critical to me because that was the only thing that got me out, was that kind of information. But once I looked back at it with fresh eyes as a deconverted person, I realized a lot of this is psychology. A lot of this is not just information. A lot of this is being willing to hyperanalyze, both from the perspective of people stuck in it, like, why are you stuck in it? Why do you believe? But also from the perspective of people healing, like, how do you unpack what happened to you? This is something that truly happened it was done to you. Just like you would, if you were assaulted as a child and you had to unpack it in adulthood and say, I need to understand why I have this kind of personality based on the assault that happened. Your identity was assaulted in Christianity, even if you thought it was pretty good. When I was a Christian, I was pretty happy. I didn't feel like I was traumatized. I realized later I was, but when I was in it, I would have said, how can the God of the universe, full of love and grace and kindness and glory, and he's redeemed me, how can that be traumatic? He just rescued me from hell. Like, thank you very much. I'll take it every time. I loved it. But when you step out of it and you realize what it did to you and how it suckered you and deceived you, you're like, oh, wow, I was traumatized. And so the psychological part of it seemed like it was much more up my alley, as well as trying to find more of a voice. And this isn't something I do as much yet, but I'm trying to slowly weave it into the channel. But to be much more poetic, whether it's literal poetry or poetic kind of monologues, but just saying, like, you once you go through this, there's some things that you really need to start doing, such as you need to reparent yourself. If your parents told you Jesus was real and it's heaven or hell, you don't have to be, as an adult, your new parent. How do you do that? You need to have conversations with yourself as a child. You need to have sort of funeral-like conversations with God, saying, not to say you're actually talking to him, but to say, I need to put this thing to bed. Like, put this thing to bed. Have that conversation with the God character that you thought was real. And also understand just what is the nature of indoctrination? What is the nature of psychological manipulation? How do you do this? And I began to think to myself, that's my power. My power is in trying to find the words and trying to find the insights to say, do you realize what was done to you? And do you realize how to undo it now, how to heal? I remember the book of Esther. I had memorized it when I was in Bible quizzing. One year we memorized Esther and James, and memorized a lot of other books. But in
Just
Esther,
to be clear, for everyone who thinks they heard you wrong, you memorized the entire book of Esther and James in 1 year.
Yeah.
Just as I think,
Well,
because another year was other books.
Yeah, hundreds of us. It was mostly Mennonites. I mean, Mennonites are, they're probably hyper memorizing verses anyway. But and they're good at it. You know why? You know why they're really good at Bible quizzing? Do you know what Bible quizzing is?
Yeah, well, I do. My dad was deep into Bible quizzing. I didn't do any of it, but I still, we basically had our own private sessions at home as a kid. Go ahead.
I'll tell you this just because it's funny. It's like it just makes you smile a little bit. But but Mennonites are probably some of the most honest, real people you're going to meet. Mennonites are apart from the mythology of, but they're down to earth, real people. They're often farmers or something like that, but they have a very simple perspective on life, and they certainly would say, and I think most of them would live it, that they want to just tell the truth. So you don't think of them as being very deceptive. But so with Bible quizzing, you memorize these verses for the first few months, before you ever meet up. But then when you actually have meetups, you have these little pads that are on these chairs. And so each team might have like 5 people and 5 people and 5 people. And the wires connect up to the Bible quizzer up at the table. And so the Bible quizzer will start to ask a question. And whoever wants to answer it first has to get their butt off. And as soon as you get your butt off, the light will go off on their board. But visually that the Bible quizzer is not just looking at the light, because the lights are, you can be at the wrong angle, you can't quite see it, but you literally see someone rising up. It's like, to stop asking your question, not just because you see the light, but because you see someone's getting off their chair. So these really skinny Mennonite girls would master this by getting up, getting their heinies off of the little pad on the chair so slow that the light would go off, but they were so slow that the Bible quizzer did not see them standing up. So they would get an extra couple words in there. And, so you learn from them to go up very slowly.
Yeah, that Bible quizzing thing, it is, I think it's the least Christian thing that Christians do. When you, it's so cutthroat in there. Like, you got so many books memorized and to hear my dad talk about his quizzing days, there was a fire in his eyes. It was it felt not safe because the Bible quizzers are just so intense. Yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
They fight to win for sure. But it's Christian in the sense that they're hiding God's word in their heart. If that's their motivation, they're definitely doing that. But in the book of Esther, she's in that spot where Haman is unleashing this plot to destroy the Jews, and Esther knows that if she goes into the king and just says, "Hey, I need to talk to you right now," that in that culture she could be killed. He could just be like, "I did not invite you, Esther, even though you're one of my queens, my many queens in my harem. I did not invite you in, and I technically have the right to put you to death because I did not grant you this audience." And so Esther's in that spot of what do I do? I know that I need to do something, but also I could be killed. And Mordecai says to her uncle Mordecai says, "Esther, look, you don't know, but God might have put you in this specific spot for such a time as this. And you need to see yourself as pivotal in this story." And of course she was. She goes in and she's able to reverse it all and save her people. And I feel almost culturally where we're at with the way that things are moving with Christian nationalism and other aspects of this, that we need to see ourselves as for such a time as this, we are here. And if you really, I know in some senses as a nihilist, it doesn't matter. And who cares? And I know there's people that probably do deconvert and all right, well, I left Christianity. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life playing video games. I don't care. That's fine. You don't have to care. It's your life. But some of us really want to leave this planet better than we found it. And I know that I don't get to live to see it. And I know I don't get a reward in the afterlife for having made that fight. But I still want to leave it better for my kids. And I also want to leave my kids better for the planet. And so if those are your motivations, then you have to fight, and you have to fight smart. And it takes people that have been in it neck deep to undo it neck deep. I'm one of those people. And so I believe that based on both what I'm doing with interviews now, but also especially the mythology presentations that are going to be coming, I believe that I will be able to do major damage to Christianity. And I want to, because I believe it's a mind virus. I certainly respect people's freedom to pursue it if they want to, but culturally, I want to change our culture. You have to see it as they're going to change our culture if we don't do something. They're trying aggressively right now. They're going to do it. Why do they have the right to change our culture, but we don't? Why do they have the right to have all the elected offices and all this stuff and have the main voices, but we don't? And we're going to get sidelined, and we're going to get even worse if we don't speak up soon. And I feel we need people who can speak up to this and who can undo the damage to undo it. I'm not saying it takes all the background and knowledge that I went through to speak up and make a difference, but I feel especially for people like me who have a Bible college degree and a pastoral degree, if you've gone through all that stuff, you know better. You know what's at stake. You know the damage they're doing. You know how to undo it. So for goodness sake, leave this planet better than you found it. And it's not going to happen if we're quiet. It's going to happen only if we're somewhat aggressive. In a kind, polite way, but we have to be aggressive in our voice. And so, I am, there's some presentations that I'm working on that even just the titles, people are gonna be like, "Oh, he just dropped a mic on that one." Just the titles are intense. And there has to be an intensity, because if you don't call this what it is, they're going to keep on schmoozing it no, we need Christianity, and don't we need God in our culture. And we need people that are willing to stand up. It's going to take some bravery at times to really say, I'm willing to have a hardcore voice in this. And a lot of people might be on the sidelines and even in fear of what that looks like. But I think people like you, like me, who are willing to stand up, we can be, in a sense, the trendsetters and the beginning phase for other people that are on the sidelines to say, yeah, we all collectively who have escaped should be on the culture change team. But we just needed some galvanization. We needed people to help us, show us the way. And I think it's time to be much more aggressive. And I do hope, I say this sort of tongue in cheek, but not really. If I put 1,000 people in the kingdom, I hope to take 100,000 back out. The more that we're articulate in doing that, the better. And the more that we're out front, the better. And honestly, I'm fearful of where our culture is going. In some ways, I want to say, speak up while you can. I hope that isn't a prophetic thing, but speak up while you can, because there may be a day, and we don't know when that's coming. But while I can speak, I will speak proudly. And it's like when the world wakes up, we will, number one, be better for it. But number two, we'll look back and say, what in the world? What in the world has been happening? Like, how did we not see this? This is crazy. And I sort of liken it to like a relationship where someone wakes up where they've been married to a psychopath and an abusive narcissist. And you're like, this person's kind of nice. They have their bad days, but they're actually a nice person. And then you wake up like, oh my goodness, like, no. I need to be done with this forever. Like, that's a bad person. And you walk away and you don't look back, and you ask yourself, why did I put up with that garbage for so long? But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that works for relationships as well as religion. And I hope in this little way, and I hope hopefully eventually a bigger way, I hope to make some waves. So that's my passion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can tell. I love it. I mean, we disagree about some of the goals and some of the ways to get there, but I feel like this Tim is I like this Tim has the same heart as Christian Tim, which is if I'm seeing the world correctly right now, how do I help my fellow humans to be better? And I think that's the heart that got Christian Tim into the mission field, and it's getting this Tim into the new mission field. And I really appreciate the way that you go about it. Even on the parts that we disagree about, the world needs a lot of different voices and a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different approaches. And I feel privileged to call you my friend because I love the way that you go about it and the heart that you have for people. I think it's really beautiful. I know Christians aren't going to hear that because they're going to just hear the insults about their best friend. But I just really love the way that you approach the world and the compassion and the love that you have for people. It's moving.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love that phrase someone up came up with, but I've been born again. So it is true, though. I mean, you do, it's not like you lose your morality when you leave Christianity, and it's certainly not like you lose your desire to love on people and wish, the better for our planet. The thing, though, to me, too, is that this is always going to come down to kids for me. My journey, that 3 years I told you about where I studied for a while, there was only one specific incident that kicked it off. And it was related to my kids. We're sitting around singing Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. And it spurred me to think, do I want to teach my kids about genocide and land theft and all that stuff? They became my savior. I did not ask those hard questions until they came into the equation. But then also conversely, you're looking at, once you realize what Christianity really is, that it is just an ancient version of another Greco-Roman mystery cult, that you realize these kids are being psychologically abused on an active, ongoing basis by Christians. I see teenagers and I see young children thinking that this whole thing is real. And if that doesn't break your heart as a deconverted person, I don't know what to say. It's just like, at a certain point, you got to say, this has to end. This is a mind virus. And this is a worthwhile fight. And I will be glad to spend my life and be spent. I was willing to be spent in the gospel. I'm willing to be spent for the sake of helping people escape Christianity. It's a very noble cause, and I hope to make a difference, as small as it is. The waves will come, and hopefully, it's like I impact one person, then they impact two others, and hopefully the waves just get bigger.
Right, and just to do a little interpretation for the Christians, because that's what I'm compelled to do. Like, the way that Christians see every other religion, we also feel sorry for their kids. We look back at, whether it was the Egyptians and they were, sacrificing their virgin daughters or whatever. I don't know what the Egyptians did, but, assuming that's the case, I'm assuming that wasn't as much conflict as we wish it would be. My guess is that whoever had the honor of giving their life to the gods felt positively about it. At least some of them did. And some of the parents were proud that, oh, that was my daughter. My daughter is the daughter that we're going to sacrifice this year. It wasn't like, and so we would look at that culture and we would say, oh, those poor kids, this is being forced on them. This is child abuse. And no one in that culture feels that way at all. They only are happy to be a part of it. And we would say the same thing, about Islam, about, to really, again, these are not my views. I'm just trying to voice the views of Christians that live in my inside my head. You know, those little kids are being trained up to be terrorists, and they're you know, being forced to wear the hijab and whatever it is that we see in their culture, and we're like, well, that's child abuse. That's being forced on the kid. That's not, you know, some privilege from God. They don't necessarily see it that way. And so we could point at every single religion, everyone that's not mine. I look at their thing and I go, well, that religion has child abuse in it. So I have to assume that if my religion weren't true, I know that it is, but if my religion wasn't true, there would probably be some child abuse in that as well. So someone from the outside might look at my religion and say, oh, well, they're doing bad things to people and they're hurting kids, even though in my world, I don't experience that. I don't feel that way about what we're doing. That it's a reasonable position that, yeah, probably if this isn't true, there is a lot of abuse. There's a lot of really negative things that are going on that I don't currently see because I like it so much. So just to affirm that message, it's a possibility. You know, even if you're still in it, maybe the rest of the world doesn't see it the same way. And if they really love kids, they would actually oppose you. And they might be wrong. You might be wrong. But, you know, that's not an invalid position because it's one that you probably hold if you are in a religion. So,
yeah. And I'll just speak practically too. I have, you know, 4 kids. None of them believe. They all think that it's mythology. They have been extremely well educated about where the mythology came from, and they're going to be much more educated soon. When you raise kids devoid of the true, like, indoctrination, I mean, like, they know what Christianity claims. They're not devoid of that information. They know the claims. But, like, when they don't truly believe that they're sinners, that they're wicked, that they're bound for hell, if they don't believe that they're born broken in need of a savior, a rescuer, you see the difference. And, you know, as much as I would have loved to have seen what my life would have been like if I didn't have all this bad stuff woven into my mind, I kind of see it through them. And I see practically the lack of trauma from that stuff being shoved into their minds at a young age. They know that they need to grow in wisdom. They know they sometimes make bad decisions. They know we're loving and kind and so forth. But none of it's attached to you are inherently wicked and it just someone's judging your thoughts. It's amazing. I see it in real time every day. These kids are noticeably different, noticeably better because Christianity is absent from their worldview. And that's, if nothing else, if I can claim nothing else to my, you know, wins in life, that's worth it. I am sending 4 kids out into this world without mythology as their prison. And that's a beautiful thing. That's worth it, if nothing else.
thank you all for joining me. Before you forget, right now, go subscribe to Tim's channel. It's the Harmonic Atheist. I did, and it sounds like he's got some great projects coming up that I don't want to miss. Hopefully you can tell that I spent considerable effort putting this all together so you could have it for free. So now it's your turn. Go click a couple buttons and give me something for free so we can keep this good thing going between us. And for you crazy, like-minded superfans, you're the only ones actually reading the descriptions of these things. So make sure you click on that link for the superfans for more ways to show your support for free, and we can keep this love train rolling. Be well, everyone. I'm rooting for you.